So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phones. It was a few weeks after Christmas, and my parents has gotten me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before the cell phones were big. I had given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m., and I had been sleeping when my phone begins to ring. I thought, that's odd. Who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So I answered it. But all I could hear was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone was just teasing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told them to stop calling me and hung up. Laid down again for 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the third time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny. I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, so stop calling me." This time, there was a reply. It was a man's voice. Sounded very gravely, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke my mom, telling her what happened. She woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up, and my dad goes into my room, checking the windows and everything, making sure all the locks on the doors are locked, and proceed to tell me that it's just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine. He tells me to unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep until my mom wakes me up for school. I just got up and start getting ready. Open my blinds to my windows that leads to the backyard and notice on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents and they're totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police came out to take a report and look at the evidence, and they decided they want to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, back to the back door, and back to the front door. The police thinks the guy had tried to get into the house, but thankfully enough, they didn't. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was traveling back by train from his village to another to visit his family. He had to change trains at one point, and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform in a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about the time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such and such a train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be long until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night and offered him a meal in a room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less the standard when traveling in this part of the USSR, and Great Uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was glad to accept her offer. He took his suitcase, and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2, and by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was tired and hungry. They went inside, and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some prosciutto for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realize that the old woman was actually a man, not wanting to pray and too tired to care. John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said good night, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called to her, but she didn't answer, and he heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning, and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down, the lid on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep, though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of the bed, hoping to find a chamber pot or something he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. "Nope," Great Uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. It was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man. But if he broke the window and tried to get out that way, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows who else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he could get away. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress, and covered it with the blanket. Then he got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs, and then toward the room. The lock clicked, and the knob turned slowly. In the gloom, John saw someone move toward the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person has bashed the body on the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. There was silence when the person went out of the room, and the door was shut again. The footsteps went down the stairs, and then there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar, and was able to slowly pry the window open. He didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out, then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind him. He landed without too much injury, and he began to run into the field behind the house toward some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and John was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what had happened to the authorities. since at that time in the USSR, there was a clear chance he would have been the one who got into trouble. He just thanked God he escaped and decided that the next time he traveled to visit relatives, he would take another way. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening and hope you enjoyed the stories. If so, please subscribe to our channel. It'd be an amazing support to help us share more spooky videos in the future. Also, if you have any scary experience you like to share, please send us your story on the email in the description below. So, until then, have a wicked day.